It was just after noon on a Saturday, so quiet you could hear the ice shift in my glass of lemonade, when the unmistakable sound of a cannonball splash shattered my moment like a beer bottle under a lawnmower. I stepped onto my back porch, blinking into the sun, and there they were, 3 kids in full splash warfare mode, turning my backyard pool into a public water park while their mother lounged on one of my Adirondack chairs like it was a 5-star resort she'd booked herself. I wasn't renting my property. I hadn't invited anyone over. And as far as I was aware, the local HOA had not suddenly purchased shares in my kidney-shaped pool or the plastic flamingo floating in it. Karen waved at me like I was the pool boy late to his shift and casually called out that I might want to check the filter. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding resolved with awkward laughter and a quick towel off. No. This was war. Not loud, aggressive war, but the quiet, polite kind, waged with passive-aggressive smiles and gate locks that click with finality. I walked down the steps of my porch slowly, lemonade in one hand, the other hand gesturing vaguely toward the aquatic circus in front of me. Karen didn't get up. She adjusted her sunglasses and said something to the kids, who responded by laughing and splashing louder. One of them yelled something about how cool this pool was compared to the one at the rec center. I asked, as calmly as a man could when his Saturday plans were hijacked by chlorine pirates, what exactly was going on here. Karen, with the confidence of a small-town mayor giving a ribbon-cutting speech, told me not to worry, that her kids just needed to burn off some energy and that it was so hot out, surely I could understand. She added that she assumed, since I lived in a community like this, I'd be happy to share. I looked around to see if maybe this was a prank, some hidden camera show about testing homeowners' patience. But no, the only audience was my neighbor Greg 2 yards over, pretending to deadhead his rose bushes while clearly listening to every word. I tried again. I explained that the pool was on my private lot, that it wasn't part of the HOA's shared facilities, and that, in fact, the HOA had nothing to do with this part of the neighborhood. Karen nodded like she understood, and then immediately turned and told her kids to stay in the shallow end, completely ignoring me. That's when I realized she wasn't just ignoring me. She was mentally erasing my ownership of the space and replacing it with some imaginary version of the neighborhood where she made the rules and I was lucky to be living within her kingdom. I turned, walked back up the steps without saying another word, went inside and grabbed my keys. Then I walked out the side gate, reached over, and locked the pool entrance from the outside with a fresh latch I'd bought months ago and never bothered to install until now. It clicked loud enough to echo off the fence. Karen sat up straight. The kids stopped playing. I took a long sip of lemonade, leaned against the gatepost, and told her politely that it was probably time to dry off and head home. That's when the shouting started. Karen came stomping out of the pool, dripping wet, one sandal in her hand like a weapon, yelling about how I had trapped her children inside a locked area, and how she was calling the HOA, the police, and possibly the fire department. I reminded her that the gate had an inside handle, and that they weren't trapped, they were just no longer welcome. She stormed up to the gate, yanked it, and realized it was locked in a way she couldn't override without going all the way around the property. She demanded I unlock it. I told her I would, once the kids were out of the water, and she agreed to never set foot on my land again. She refused. I nodded, turned, and sat back down on my porch with my lemonade, watching her try to negotiate with her kids, who were now fully aware that the fun was over but still unwilling to get out without some extra splashing. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then Karen finally managed to get them all dried, wrapped in towels, and around to the front where I met them and opened the side gate. She refused to look at me. Her jaw was clenched like a doorstop. As they marched past me, she whispered something about how she was going to make sure I regretted this, that I'd be hearing from the HOA, and maybe even her attorney. I told her, still smiling, that I looked forward to the paperwork and suggested she check the neighborhood bylaws about trespassing and unauthorized use of private amenities. She looked like she wanted to throw her sandal at my face but thought better of it. That evening, Greg came by with a cold beer and a grin on his face. He said he'd seen the whole thing and had been waiting years for someone to stand up to her. He also said that Karen had already started emailing the HOA board and copying everyone on the street, claiming I'd endangered her kids and violated neighborhood hospitality protocols. I told him I wasn't worried, because I had something Karen didn't expect: documentation. Every inch of my property was privately owned, maintained at my own expense, and excluded from the shared HOA map. I had camera footage of her and her kids entering without permission. And I had a receipt for the brand new gate lock, time-stamped to the minute. By sunset, my pool was quiet again, the water still except for the lazy drift of the flamingo float. I leaned back, finished my lemonade, and thought about installing a second gate just for the fun of it. But I knew this wasn't the end. Not with Karen. She wasn't the type to retreat and reflect. She was the type to escalate. And something told me, deep down, that this cannonball stunt was just the opening splash in what was about to become a full-blown neighborhood storm. The next morning began with a tap on my window, and the soft hum of passive-aggressive revenge humming through the air like cicadas before a summer storm. I stepped out to grab the paper only to find a folded HOA complaint form taped to my mailbox with bright pink glittery washi tape, like it had been handcrafted by someone with too much time and not enough sense. Karen's handwriting was unmistakable, large and swoopy, like she was writing a wedding invitation instead of accusing me of criminal misconduct. Apparently, in her alternate version of events, I had forcibly locked a community member and her children in a hazardous area and then refused to let them leave until they were emotionally distressed and sunburned. According to her, I had weaponized the gate and used my lemonade as a form of intimidation. I laughed out loud at that line. Weaponized lemonade. If I ever wrote a memoir, that would be the title. I brought the form inside, scanned it, and emailed it to myself just in case she tried to alter it later. Then I opened the HOA bylaws binder I kept in the pantry next to the expired soy sauce and went hunting for ammunition. 15 minutes later, I had my smoking gun. Section 4.6, paragraph 3, stated clearly that privately owned amenities including but not limited to pools, hot tubs, and recreational fixtures located on deeded property are excluded from communal access unless explicitly offered by the owner in writing. There was even a clause forbidding members from implying shared access to non-HOA amenities. Karen had not only trespassed, she had violated a clause written in bold ink. And that wasn't all. A sticky note left in my mailbox the night before, which I had initially thought was just junk, turned out to be a printed email Karen had sent to several board members claiming I had agreed to host a neighborhood swim meet at my pool. I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't even agreed to be part of the conversation. What really made me pause, though, was the pool cleaner's arrival later that day. Luis, a quiet guy with headphones usually welded to his ears, looked unusually sheepish as he approached me, towel slung over his shoulder, and said, "Hey, just checking on the cleaning schedule Karen said you confirmed." I blinked at him, stunned. Karen had scheduled pool service for a party she invented. Luis showed me the text. Sure enough, it was written as if from me. "Hey Luis, can you make sure the pool's clean by Saturday? We're doing a big neighborhood thing." I had never sent that. Karen had impersonated me. That was when I stopped playing defense. I printed every screenshot, every text, every HOA clause I could find that showed my innocence and her lunacy. Then I wrote my own complaint. Not handwritten but typed, formatted, and signed like it had just come from a lawyer's desk. I titled it Unauthorized Use and Trespass by Board Member and attached photos of her kids in the pool, the gate lock, Luis's fake text, and a copy of the email about the supposed swim meet. Just to twist the knife, I also included a bill for the pool cleaner visit and a legal disclaimer stating that any further trespass would result in formal civil action. I slid the packet into an envelope and dropped it in the HOA box myself, right in front of Karen, who just happened to be pruning her hydrangeas in heels as if she hadn't been waiting there like a sitcom villain at the edge of the screen. She raised one eyebrow as I passed. I smiled and kept walking. She didn't speak. Her silence was louder than any accusation. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a group email from the HOA board. Subject line: clarification needed regarding pool use. It included both Karen's complaint and mine. The body of the message asked both parties to provide any additional relevant documentation or witness statements before the next HOA meeting, which had suddenly been moved up to Thursday. I replied with my files already attached. Karen responded 10 minutes later with a 4-paragraph email accusing me of cyberbullying, slander, and something called aesthetic disruption to communal morale. Greg, my neighbor, replied all with a single emoji. The popcorn bucket. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. The next day, I installed 3 bright red private property signs on my fence, 1 at the gate and 2 along the rear perimeter just in case Karen was planning a sneak entry through the backyard. Greg helped me drill them in. He offered to stand outside with a garden hose and bark like a Doberman during the next party. We were still laughing when I saw something new on my security camera app. A door hanger flyer Karen had posted on half the street's mailboxes. It was titled Community Pool Spirit Day and had a picture of 3 smiling children under a sun cartoon. It read, "Join us Saturday for fun, snacks, and swim." Location: 1443 Timberline Drive. That was my address. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds, completely stunned. Karen had doubled down. She was not just lying. She was actively marketing her trespassing operation as a community celebration. I marched down to the HOA president's house, clipboard in hand. Her name was Denise, a retired school principal with a face like granite and a handshake that could crush a racquetball. She listened calmly as I explained everything. When I showed her the flyer, she closed her eyes for a second, then muttered something about Karen always pushing her luck. Denise told me that if I could show the board one more clear violation, they'd have no choice but to call an emergency vote on disciplinary action. I told her I had something better than that. I had a neighbor with footage. Greg had just installed new exterior cameras, and one of them caught Karen slipping into my backyard the previous morning before taping the flyer to my gate. I texted him. He texted back the clip within 5 minutes. Karen had looked both ways like a cartoon burglar before quietly sticking the paper and walking off in her wedge sandals. By the time Thursday came, I had printed all of it, bound it, and labeled each section. Karen, for her part, showed up to the meeting in a designer blazer with her kids in tow for sympathy. She passed out cookies to everyone before it started. The room was filled with curious neighbors, many of whom had heard different versions of the story. Some thought I'd chased her off with a rake. Others heard she was planning to install a diving board on my patio. The truth was weirder than either. When the board called us up to speak, I let Karen go first. She spoke for 10 minutes, weaving a fantasy so polished it almost sounded real. Her voice cracked once for effect. Her kids fidgeted behind her, clearly bored. Then I took out my binder, clicked the rings open, and began with the flyer. The room grew quieter with each page. The fake text, the HOA bylaws, the camera footage, the kids splashing, the pool guy's testimony, and finally, the doorbell video of her placing the flyer on my gate. When I finished, no one clapped. No one spoke. Denise looked at Karen with an expression I can only describe as the polite version of, "Are you serious?" Karen shifted in her chair, smiled nervously, and asked if the board wanted cookies before deliberations. No one took one. They didn't need to deliberate long. Denise announced they would reconvene for final votes by Saturday and adjourned the meeting. As we all filed out, Karen tried to smile at Greg, who nodded once and walked away. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The silence following a good defense is better than any speech. Saturday came with the same kind of false calm that usually precedes a thunderstorm or a power outage. Quiet, a little too quiet, and thick with the kind of tension that made even the birds hesitant to chirp. I woke up early, more out of instinct than anxiety.